Hey guys, tonight we're about to step into a world that makes modern weddings look like a relaxing afternoon tea party. That's right, we're talking medieval weddings, where the vows were literally till death do you part, and sometimes death was already sitting at the table with you. Before we dive in, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Leave a comment telling me what you think of medieval traditions or share a funny wedding mishap you've witnessed. I'll be here reading your comments, probably in my pajamas. Now, dim the lights, fire up a fan for that perfect soothing hum, and get comfortable. If you're lucky, no one's making you wear a corset or stand under a hot iron chandelier. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what actual medieval brides went through? Was the whole white dress thing really just a setup for poor laundry skills? What was it like to get married to a guy who may or may not have been in a bloody feud with his neighbor's goats? Ever thought about saying "I do" in front of your whole village while wearing a dress made out of burlap sacks? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up in 1215. You're the bride-to-be in a medieval village. You've got lice, cold feet, literally, and your dad's about to sell you to a random guy who's never smiled in his life. Enjoy the pre-wedding jitters, medieval style. Picture this. You're a medieval bride, and you've just spent the last week scraping barnacles off the wedding feast platters, while your family frantically argues over how many pigs your dowry is worth. There's no honeymoon here, just a very sweaty night of feasting, brawling, and hoping that you've managed to scrape enough money to afford your second best dress. Oh, and did we mention that your future husband might have already pledged his love to 5 other women? That's normal in medieval times, right? How could it not be? Now, let's talk about the night before the wedding. It's a mix of chaos, confusion, and just a hint of dread. Picture it. You're lying in your bed, the sound of pigs snuffling and chickens clucking outside your window, and you can't help but wonder why you agreed to this whole thing in the first place. But don't fret. This isn't just any pre-wedding anxiety. It's medieval pre-wedding anxiety, where your nervousness is compounded by the very real possibility that your wedding could be interrupted by a random peasant revolt, a rogue cow, or your uncle getting into a drunken brawl over who's allowed to sit at the head table. Your family's been up for hours, sweating in the kitchen, throwing together whatever food they can find to feed the entire village. Nothing says romantic wedding like serving your guests a bowl of cold soup and some old bread that's probably been sitting out since last harvest. Of course, none of this is your fault. You've been too busy trying to look presentable while your cousins are debating how much extra they can charge for the wedding entertainment. Spoiler: the entertainment is probably just some old man playing a lute badly. Let's not forget the wedding attire. You've got your best dress on. Well, your second best dress, since the best one probably has a mysterious stain on it that you've been trying to cover with a veil for the past week. It's the most extravagant thing you've ever owned, but it still looks like something you might wear to clean out the barn, just with a few more patches. You've been in this thing for hours now, trying not to sit in anything, because you know the minute you do, you'll be covered in mud, or worse. Oh, and did I mention you're sweating? You're sweating in places you didn't even know existed. The corset is tight, so tight you feel like you might pass out. But that's okay, because everyone's going to be too busy discussing the feast to notice that you've already turned into a human puddle. Now, while your family bickers over dowries, pigs, and the exact number of cows your future husband can afford, there's another little detail you might want to consider. Your future husband. He's out there somewhere, probably sitting in a smoky corner of the local tavern, nursing a flagon of ale, while you're trapped in the house trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. If you've heard the rumors, and let's face it, you've heard them all, he's got a few other women in the mix. Maybe it's just a little flirtation, maybe it's more serious. But hey, no big deal, right? It's the Middle Ages. Having 5 fiancés is practically a job requirement. Surely one of them has already dropped out of the race by now, and the only one left standing is you. Speaking of your husband-to-be, do you really know him? I mean, you've met him. He's that guy you've been vaguely introduced to at a few family gatherings, right? He seems fine, maybe a bit distant. Perhaps he's the one who insisted on a pre-wedding duel. Or worse, he's the one who brought a goat into the village square to prove his love in some weird medieval ritual. But at the end of the day, your marriage is a business transaction more than a love story. So, what if he's pledged his troth to a few other women? It's basically just part of the deal. You've seen it happen. Heck, your own parents didn't exactly marry for love. They married because the local lord said it was time for them to join forces for the good of the kingdom, or some other tired nonsense. Now, it's the day of the wedding. You've managed to keep your stomach from rebelling for the past 24 hours, but that doesn't mean you feel great. You've got a headache, your feet are sore from all the standing, and the smell of roasting meat is starting to make you wish you could just disappear into the nearest ditch. Still, you make your way down the aisle, walking with all the grace you can muster while trying not to trip on the mud or the weird cobblestones that the town decided were charming. You're not sure who's more nervous, your groom or you. But one thing's for sure, you're about to be tied to a guy who, until further notice, is mostly a stranger. And that's the thing about medieval weddings. They're not about love. They're about surviving the next winter and securing your place in the social order. In many ways, you're just another pawn in a larger game of political maneuvering. But hey, at least the whole thing's over after a week of awkwardness. And the worst thing that happens is that your father spends half the night drunkenly discussing how many pigs he can sell to fund the ceremony. Oh, and in case you're wondering, there's no cake. You'll be lucky if you get to sit down at all during the entire thing. Enjoy your big day. The wedding procession in the Middle Ages wasn't some grand, slow-moving procession through a picturesque cathedral. No, you've got a donkey, a bunch of drunk relatives, and a parade of misery. The road is muddy, your dress is already falling apart, and the guy you're about to marry looks like he's trying to sneak a peek at the town baker. Is this what you signed up for? Oh, and did we mention that the whole thing is taking place during a plague? The air smells like cheese and regret. Welcome to medieval matrimony. Let's start with the fact that no one, not the groom, not the bride, and definitely not the priest, wants to be here. You've probably just spent the last couple of hours trying not to suffocate in that overly tight corset while your entire family argues over the seating arrangements for the reception. This is no lovely stroll down the aisle. Instead, you're marching through ankle-deep mud with your relatives trailing behind, arguing about whose job it is to bring more bread to the feast. They've probably been drinking all day, and by the time the procession starts, your father's already 3 cups of ale in, which means he's loudly proclaiming how much your dowry is worth to anyone who will listen. Great. You've just realized you're about to be wed to a man whose first action as a married man will likely be to ask if he can go out for a drink after the ceremony. Maybe you're the one who should be going out for a drink. As for your bridal dress, oh, it's a masterpiece, all right. Made of rough, scratchy wool that's somehow both too tight and too loose at the same time, it has been passed down from a dozen generations of brides who probably went through exactly the same thing you're going through. But hey, at least it's not a burlap sack, right? The one thing you're sure of is that it will fall apart before you reach the altar. The seams are already stretching in places they shouldn't, and every step you take feels like a roll of thunder is about to rip through the town, signaling the end of your carefully curated bridal glow. Oh, and speaking of things falling apart, the procession itself isn't much better. The carriage, if you can even call it that, is a donkey cart that's seen better days, likely back when it wasn't hauling an overworked baker's goods through town. The donkey doesn't seem all that thrilled either. You swear it's giving you the stink eye as it drags you along at a pace that makes you wonder if it's trying to make a break for it. But no, it's a donkey, and you're stuck on this slow-moving misery train. Every bump and jolt feels like a personal attack on your already fragile nerves. But hey, at least it's better than walking in those medieval shoes, which, by the way, are not designed for walking in mud or for maintaining any semblance of dignity. It's a good thing your gown is so heavy, because you might just sink into the earth and disappear into medieval obscurity if the weight of it doesn't keep you grounded. Let's talk about the atmosphere, shall we? The air is thick, not with the smell of romance, but with a mix of sweat, wet wool, and the distinct odor of cheese. Because, of course, the town's entire stock of dairy products is parading along with you. The unwashed masses are cheering as you trudge past, but they seem more interested in the hunk of bread they've been given than in your wedding. It's like a feast for peasants, not a celebration of your union. Somewhere, a rooster is crowing, maybe in an attempt to signal the end of your dignity. But no, the rooster can't help you. This is your fate now, trudging toward a future where your husband will likely spend half his life trying to settle debts, and the other half wondering why you can't just be grateful for the fact that he didn't marry someone else. Yet. Now, imagine this. It's the height of a plague, and the air smells faintly of regret. And no, that's not the wine. People are sneezing, coughing, and trying to hold it together long enough to get to the ceremony part. You can practically taste the sickness in the air. But hey, this is medieval times. What's a wedding without a bit of death creeping in from the corners? And, as if the mood weren't already set just perfectly, a few of your distant relatives start bickering loudly over who's going to sit next to the mayor at the reception. The mayor, by the way, is already too busy scratching his head because the entire town is starting to get a little bit too familiar with the plague and a little too suspicious of the local butcher. Your procession, which was meant to be a grand, dignified moment in your life, has turned into a parade of pure, unadulterated chaos. And when you finally make it to the ceremony, battered, bruised, and probably covered in mud, there's no applause, no roses, and certainly no grand I do moment. Instead, the priest mumbles something under his breath about joining your souls, or something equally cryptic, and you're now married. It's done. The wedding march is over, and there's no time for celebration. You've got a lifetime of medieval nonsense ahead of you, and probably no way of getting out of it, unless you fancy a run-in with a ferocious plague or a very angry local lord. So, you made it through the procession, but trust me, the real fun is only just beginning. It's time for the ceremony. But wait, what's this? There are no vows, no I-dos, no rings. Instead, you're probably being handed over to your new husband like livestock, while a priest mumbles something about union and for the good of the kingdom. And that's it. That's your big moment. Till death do us part might sound romantic, but in the medieval era, that's just a formality. It's more like, until I die of plague, or you get beheaded for insulting the wrong noble. So, here you are, standing in front of a crowd of villagers, who are mostly too busy eyeballing the food or swigging back ale to notice that you're actually getting married. What's happening now is less of a grand ceremony and more of a transaction, a carefully timed business deal dressed up in wool and mud. The priest, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else, probably in a plague-free country, mutters some words about your bond and the benefit of family ties in an accent so thick you can barely understand him. He may as well be reading the menu for the feast. For richer, for poorer, who's got time for that? The priest is probably thinking, can we just get this over with so I can finish my lunch? And there you are, clutching your hands together, hoping that your husband remembers your name by the time you make it to the reception. But don't get your hopes up. The whole idea of romantic love is about as far from this ceremony as possible. Your groom is probably just as tired as you are, and he's barely making eye contact, probably because he's wondering if anyone at the feast has managed to bring a second round of wine. The whole thing feels like a bad skit from a medieval comedy show, only you're not in on the joke. Oh, and about those vows, forget it. The priest might mumble something about how you'll love each other until death do you part. But in the medieval world, death is just an inconveniently timed obstacle. The real till death moment is when one of you dies from the plague, or if you're particularly unlucky, when your husband insults a nobleman and ends up with his head on a spike. Romantic, right? In fact, the vows are more like a legal disclaimer than anything heartfelt. I promise to stick with you, unless of course we both get killed by a warlord or a disease. But hey, no hard feelings. If you're lucky, the priest will sprinkle some holy water on your head and mutter some words about the union being blessed by God. But it's not like this is the pinnacle of spiritual connection or anything, more like a check on a very long to-do list. This marriage, it's more about securing your family's land, your dowry, and making sure no one is feuding with anyone in the kingdom. Your future is being decided by how much livestock your family has accumulated and whether your new husband's farm has any decent crops this season. If he's got a few pigs and the land is fertile, well, that's about as much romance as you're going to get. And speaking of romance, forget about the wedding ring. That's not something you're going to get in the medieval world. Sure, maybe your groom has a shiny metal ring, but that's more of a badge of ownership than a symbol of love. At best, it's probably a chunky hunk of iron that was hastily forged by a local blacksmith who was too busy figuring out how to keep the town's fire burning to worry about making anything pretty. But no one's really worried about that. This is more about survival than the forever part. And don't even think about the kiss. Oh no, that's not going to happen. If you're lucky, you might get a quick peck. But given that your groom has probably been up all night with the boys, or more accurately, with a few pints of ale, he's more likely to forget about that and just shove you toward the feast. The only kiss you're getting is probably the stench of unwashed breath and the overwhelming urge to break free from the uncomfortable knot in your stomach. As you stand there, wondering when this strange anti-romantic ritual will finally end, you realize one harsh truth. This is it. The ceremony's over. The I-dos were a formality. The kiss was an afterthought. Now you're a wife. That's it. There's no grand celebration, no applause, no fireworks. You'll be lucky if someone hands you a glass of wine and tells you to sit down. Now the only thing left to do is follow your new husband to the feast, hoping your in-laws don't start a fight and praying your new life doesn't include the plague, an unwanted pregnancy, or a sudden war. Ah, medieval matrimony, the ultimate reality check. Now, let's see if the feast lives up to the hype. But spoiler, it's probably not going to. Ah, the wedding feast. Nothing says new beginnings like eating something that's been sitting in the sun for 48 hours. You've got bread, maybe some deer meat, and is that a pigeon? Well, don't worry about it. Just eat and pray to whatever gods you believe in that this meal doesn't give you dysentery. There's no refrigeration, no proper cooking hygiene, and if you're lucky, the wine isn't actively fermenting in your stomach. But hey, it's a celebration, right? So, here you are, your wedding day finally celebrated, with a feast that's about as appetizing as the floor of a stable. The banquet hall is dimly lit by flickering candles that make you feel like you've stepped into a medieval horror show. The air is thick with the scent of grease, stale bread, and, for reasons you can't quite figure out, the faint odor of wet dog. It's a smell that says, "Eat up. Your future may be miserable, but at least you'll be full for a while." The food? Well, let's just say it's a gamble. The bread, if you can even call it that, has the consistency of a brick, but it's your only option, so you tear into it with the enthusiasm of someone who hasn't eaten in days. As for the meat, it's probably the least appetizing part of this whole meal. You were hoping for a nice roast boar, or maybe a tender leg of lamb, but no. What you get is mystery meat. Could it be venison? Could it be something that's been hunting for a little too long? Who's to say? But there it is, sitting on your plate, looking oddly gelatinous in places you didn't know. Meat could be gelatinous. It's warm, but only because it's been out in the sun for hours, basking in that perfect medieval heat. Maybe it's just a strange color because the cook decided to add a little extra spice for flavor. Or maybe it's just because the meat's been sitting in the open air since the last time the cook had a free moment. But wait, what's that in your bowl? Is it pigeon? Yes, pigeon. It might not be what you imagined you'd be eating at your wedding, but here we are. It's oddly chewy, almost rubbery, and the feathers still seem to be attached in places. You glance around nervously, trying to see if anyone else is questioning their life choices. But everyone else is too busy stuffing their faces to notice that their dinner is probably older than your great-grandmother. They're all too drunk on wine, which, by the way, is more vinegar than anything else, to care about the fact that half the meal probably passed its expiration date the second it was cooked. Speaking of wine, if you can even call it that, congratulations. You're drinking something that's so fermented it might just be classified as a biohazard. It's strong enough to strip paint off walls, but hey, it's the only drink available, and you're in no position to complain. You take a sip and immediately wonder if the fumes are going to knock you out cold before the rest of the guests. But the celebration must continue. So, you gulp it down, wondering if this is the last thing you'll remember before you pass out face first into the pigeon stew. The guests, meanwhile, are either stuffing their faces in total silence or drunkenly yelling at each other in between bites. You can hear the shouts of distant cousins arguing about whether or not the bread should have been salted, and someone in the back is laughing a little too loudly about how your father almost sold you to the wrong family. Lovely. A wedding feast is supposed to be a happy occasion, but in this case, it seems like the only thing everyone is celebrating is the fact that they're not dead yet from food poisoning. As the feast progresses, or as much as a feast can progress when everyone's too bloated or sick to move, you realize that there's no real end to this event. No grand thank you for attending speech. No cut the cake moment. No romantic first dance. Instead, you're all just sitting around the fire, slowly digesting your mystery meat, trying not to fall asleep in the muck and stink of it all. The evening drags on as you and your fellow guests pick at your plates, nursing your headache and wondering if you've eaten something that will make its way into your bloodline. And yet, somehow, the night goes on. By the time you stumble back to your honeymoon suite, which is probably a hayloft if we're being honest, you're feeling pretty terrible. But hey, that's just medieval life for you. Nothing is easy, nothing is glamorous, and everything is either too much of something or not enough of something else. In the case of your wedding feast, it was definitely too much of mystery meat, too much of bad wine, and not enough of, well, anything edible. As you lay there, your stomach a chaotic mess of indigestion and regret, you can't help but laugh. This is what you've signed up for. This is medieval matrimony. Enjoy the post-feast misery. Ah, the wedding night. A time for passion, right? Or not? You've got a guy who smells like goat sweat, a bed made of straw, and possibly a lack of any actual romance. And don't get too excited about the whole consummating the marriage thing. The sheets are already stained from God knows what, and your honeymoon will probably be spent trying to figure out what exactly your husband wants from you, other than your dowry. What happened to love, huh? Well, back in medieval times, the whole idea was more about alliances and property than love. As you awkwardly settle into your honeymoon suite, which, let's be real, is just a small, uncomfortable room in your new husband's house, filled with hay, rats, and an overwhelming smell of unwashed bodies. You start to wonder if this whole marriage thing was just a big misunderstanding. The bed, a masterpiece of medieval design, if your definition of comfort involves having something that's essentially a pile of straw covered by a few rough-hewn blankets. As you lay there, the thought crosses your mind. Did I just sign up for a lifetime of this? This? Your new husband, who's already made it very clear that his idea of romance involves grunting and maybe an awkward pat on the back, is probably sitting next to you, scratching his head. He doesn't look exactly thrilled either, but he's been drinking all night. After all, what better way to celebrate a marriage of convenience than with a few too many pints of watered-down ale? His breath smells like last night's meat stew, and if you're lucky, he'll barely notice the smell of your nervous sweat as you try not to make eye contact. The whole consummating the marriage part of the evening? Yeah, that's a bit of a joke. No, really. Forget about any passionate candlelit encounters where you fall in love all over again. You've got a guy who probably hasn't showered in a week, and his idea of affection is probably pulling you into the bed, trying to get the deed done as quickly as possible so he can get back to whatever else he's more interested in, like, say, looking at his livestock. The sheets are already a lost cause. Half of them have stains from who knows what, and you don't even want to think about the other thing that's probably on those sheets. And let's not forget about the whole idea of marital duties. This isn't some romantic vision of two people falling in love. No, this is a transaction, and the only thing your new husband might be interested in is your dowry, which is clearly the most valuable thing about you. You've just become another piece of property in his eyes. The ceremony was the business deal, and the wedding night? Well, that's the fine print. Sure, he might throw in a few murmured words of affection, but let's be honest, those are probably just part of the package deal to keep up appearances. Medieval marriages weren't about love. They were about securing property, strengthening alliances, and making sure that everyone's land stayed in the family. The idea of love didn't really enter the equation, and if it did, it was likely a second thought, something you might experience after a few years of trying to survive on the same patch of dirt together. The idea of a honeymoon is laughable. There's no romantic getaway, no soft beaches or quiet retreats. Your honeymoon is probably spent in this very room, on this very bed made of straw, wondering what exactly your role is in this grand scheme of things. You're a farmer's wife now, a landowner's possession. Your role is to produce heirs, cook meals, and ensure that the crops grow. Romance isn't a part of this equation. Survival is. As your new husband awkwardly flops down beside you and starts snoring within seconds, you lay there in the dim light, trying to block out the sounds of the night. Dogs barking, the occasional scream from the nearby tavern, and the uncomfortably loud snores coming from your husband. You start to think about how much easier life was when you were just a daughter, a person with more autonomy than you now have as a wife. There was something deeply comforting in the idea that you had control over your life, however small that control was. Now, you're nothing more than a cog in the machine of your husband's world. The night stretches on, and sleep eludes you. You try to get comfortable, but every shift seems to make the straw digging into your back worse. And your thoughts wander. What now? Is this really what it means to be married? Not the romantic tale you were promised as a child, not the dream of a happy ever after, but a dark, cramped room with a strange man, a lot of unpleasant smells, and a bed that's more hostile than supportive. As you finally manage to drift into an uneasy sleep, you realize that this night has no grand romance. It's just another step in the cycle, one where love isn't really part of the equation, and where survival and duty reign supreme. Welcome to medieval marriage, where the honeymoon is less about love and more about making it through the night without something awful happening, like another round of food poisoning or an unexpected knock at the door by a very angry neighbor. Welcome to post-wedding life, where the real fun begins. You've got a husband who thinks he's a knight, a home that smells like wet dog and no indoor plumbing. But you're not the only one suffering. Your entire village is just as miserable. But at least you can complain to them about your new life while you're stuck making soup with yesterday's leftovers. It's a romantic life, right? Wrong. It's a battle of survival, broken dreams, and a whole lot of questionable decisions. Ah, medieval marriage. You can't make this up. So here you are, in the aftermath of what was supposed to be the happiest day of your life. Your dreams of romance have already been shattered by the harsh reality of medieval life, and now you're stuck with your knightly husband, who, despite his best efforts, has yet to prove he's more than a glorified farmhand with delusions of grandeur. He spends most of his time defending the land by staring at his rusted sword and occasionally yelling at a neighbor's goat. Meanwhile, you're left with the less glamorous job of actually keeping the land alive. You might have envisioned a life of mutual respect, or at least some mutual effort. But instead, you're battling against the elements, your husband's misplaced self-importance, and the constant smell of animal waste that permeates everything you own. Your home, which you thought would be a sanctuary, is nothing more than a drafty hovel with cracks in the walls that let in the wind, the rain, and whatever scent the local pigsty has to offer. The furniture is a hodgepodge of broken stools, hard wooden chairs, and a bed made of straw that you're too exhausted to complain about. It's not exactly a castle, and it definitely doesn't come with any of the luxuries you might have hoped for. There's no warm fire crackling by the hearth to give a cozy atmosphere, just a weak flame that barely keeps the chill out, while smoke slowly seeps into the room, making your eyes water. And let's not even talk about the lack of indoor plumbing. The moment you married this man, you traded your hopes of hot baths for the joy of finding a well to fill a bucket with cold, dirty water, only to lug it back to your home and hope you don't spill it all over your feet. Every visit to the well feels like a mini adventure, where you hope the walk back isn't interrupted by any local wildlife or a wandering stranger who insists on telling you the entire history of the town's goat problem. As for food, you're pretty much stuck making do with whatever's left over from the wedding feast. That pigeon you ate earlier? That was just the beginning. The feast was, in theory, a grand gesture of abundance. But now you're picking at the scraps of meat that have long since gone cold, trying to stretch it out for as long as possible. What should be a hearty, satisfying meal turns into a desperate attempt at making something edible from whatever you can scrounge. Together, overcooked vegetables, stale bread, and the ever-present threat of mystery meat. You've learned to live without complaint, because if you even think about bringing up your dissatisfaction, you'll be greeted with a cold stare and a grunt from your husband, who would rather dream of battle than acknowledge your hunger. And speaking of your husband, he's mostly useless. Sure, he might defend the house from wandering animals, but that's only because he's terrified of anything that has the word wolf in its name. But when it comes to actual work, like tending to the crops, milking the cows, or repairing the roof, he's either napping in the corner or boasting about his knightly past. He might talk a big game about his courage and valor, but when it's time to fix the fence or carry firewood, he's nowhere to be found. You're the one doing all the heavy lifting, and you're starting to think that the whole "we're in this together" bit was just another one of those romanticized medieval ideas that was never meant to be. Life in the medieval world isn't easy for anyone, but it's especially tough when you're stuck in a loveless, practical marriage where survival is the name of the game. Your dreams of adventure and romance are buried under a mountain of chores, livestock, and a husband who believes his best skill is looking authoritative while holding a rusty sword. You've got a lifetime ahead of you, and that lifetime is filled with making do. If you're lucky, maybe there's a small silver lining. A few good meals shared with the neighbors, a hot summer's day where the sun is warm enough to dry the laundry. And maybe, just maybe, a moment where you feel like you're more than just a cog in a very dirty, very smelly machine. But for now, you've got to keep going, keep making do, and pray that tomorrow doesn't bring another random neighbor's livestock into your garden. This, my friend, is your new life. Welcome to medieval matrimony, where happiness is a luxury and survival is all you'll ever really have. So, here we are. Your medieval wedding has come to a close, and you're left with the reality of what it means to be married in the Middle Ages. A lifetime of managing livestock, making do with whatever scraps you can find, and living in a home that smells like a barn. All while your knight-in-shining armor husband spends his days dreaming of battles he'll never fight. No grand romantic gestures, no fairy tale endings, just the harsh, relentless grind of survival. But in a strange way, it's also a testament to the resilience of people. You may not have had luxury, but you had grit. You woke up every day, battled the elements, made your meals with whatever you could find, and somehow made it work. Because that's what life was like back then. Difficult, dirty, and often depressing. But still, people carried on. They survived. And in that survival, there was strength, a sort of quiet courage that not only allowed them to get by, but to build families, communities, and legacies. As you lay in your bed tonight, remember, it could be worse. You're not waking up in a barn with a man who thinks his real job is defending your doorstep from the neighbor's goats. You're not struggling to feed your family with whatever's left from last week's market. And you're certainly not worrying about the looming threat of plague with every breath you take. So tonight, as you tuck into your clean bed with hot water and indoor plumbing, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors, who survived lice, leeches, and soup that might kill you. They didn't have the luxury of taking a warm bath or sipping on a cold drink whenever they felt like it. They didn't get to click a button and have a meal delivered to their door. But they did what they had to, and that's something worth respecting. Because history may be gross and terrifying, but it's also proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and kind of ridiculous. We're all just trying to survive, and sometimes that's enough. Now, take a deep breath, appreciate the comfort of your modern life, and drift off into sleep. After all, you've made it through a medieval wedding. Surely you can conquer tomorrow. Sleep well.